Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome everyone to this session, which is an extension just for a session a while ago, which was about scholarly journals publishing. This session is about research ethics and best practices with Dr. Anthony Newman. So I don't think I need to introduce him again. He was already introduced by Dr. Jared in the first session. Those who would like to know maybe more about him, they can read the CV or the bio, short bio in the announcement. So, without any further ado, I would leave the floor for Dr. Anthony. So the floor is yours, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure what the overlap is between the first session, and the second session. I assume pretty large overlap. This talk here is looking at the area of publication ethics, and before that, research ethics, because it is nowadays very, very important with the scrutiny that everyone is giving researchers, that everything is done extremely ethically. And otherwise it will turn around and bite you. So the areas I'm going to focus on are research integrity, authorship, then sometimes a good way to explain authorship roles to people, so-called the credit system, and publishing ethics. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not just about publishers don't just get involved with publishing, but we also got to zoom out a bit first and look at the research integrity, because you've got to say, well, what is it? What is research integrity? Is it actually a useful thing to have? Yes. Is it essential? Yes. Is it transparent, invisible? Sometimes not. But the reality is that all of us have got to focus on the fact that we actually have to have research integrity. You could say integrity in all aspects of life, but certainly as scientists, as researchers, then we have to be very much looking at the area of what we're doing in the world to then report it to the world in such a way that it's very, very ethically done. So you have this sort of accepted values across science. It varies a bit, of course, because the reality is that every field, every country is slightly different, but overall, you've got this area of research integrity, where I think we can probably agree is a common goal to all. So shared values, so it's honesty, rigor, transparency, essential transparency, open communication, respecting all participants, and of course to be accountable for any actions that you're reporting. And so this whole area of research integrity is not just the publishing aspect, it's everything. Preparation, grant proposal, project proposal, and then of course your publication, and then afterwards you're then distributing the findings in some way. And so this is just a part of the quality that you have to hold yourself to in the research world. Now, how does that work in terms of translation into by researchers? You say, look at this little circle here. You're doing the right thing, doing things right at the right time, doing things when no one's watching and when people are watching. So you've got to use very clear processes that are very transparent, honest and verifiable methods in terms of performing and evaluating the research. And also you've got to report the results in such a way that all the various rules, regulations, guidelines, ethical procedures, and everything is also there as well. Any potential conflict of interest has to also be dealt with. And so if there is potential conflict of interest, you have to be very transparent to let the reader, well, firstly the editor, secondly the reader, know that there is potential conflict, but here's what it involves, hence the transparency. And so then again, also making sure that everyone gets proper recognition. In other words, you cite the people involved, because if you just take someone else's work without citing it, you're in effect you're stealing their intellectual property. And everyone has the right to their own intellectual property. Now, this has to be done at the personal level, and it has to be done at the institutional level and the government level and society as a whole. But it's what you have is you have to have the whole idea of the scientific misconduct has to be looked at. And sometimes you need an IRB. Now, not so much if you're not working with humans and animals, but when you are very much an IRB, that's this IRB is allowing you to do certain research. And if you don't have the IRB approval, Internal Research Board, then what happens is you shouldn't even start the research project. And there has been some cases in some countries where they were not used to getting ethics approval before they started the research project, and that's gone rather sort of badly wrong, as it were. So now, very fortunately, you guys have got very, very good framework of ethics control. And so you have the Ethics and Integrity Committee has overall responsibility, provides an oversight of what's going on. It's training, awareness, courses, like this one, for example. Also, the use of AI appropriately. Then you have compliance, the code of conduct, committee oversight. So from that point of view, it's great that this whole structure is there. It makes it easier to be guided to do the right things and to turn to people to ask for advice, which you need to if you're not sure about certain things. And certainly, there are some universities in the world where it's almost ignored, which is rather sad. And then what happens is that the authors are struggling, or the researchers are struggling, and then they're penalised as authors not doing things correctly. Now, of course, as a researcher, you've got to be very ethical. I mean, you've got to tell the whole truth, not just convenient things. So therefore, all the experiments that you say you're going to do, you should do, and then you should then report the results. Now, if some of them are not results you expect, be a good researcher and work out what's going on as you can, and try and work out why the thing didn't work. Do not just do cherry picking to find some nice, interesting story, and the rest gets tossed away, because that is fraud, of course. And at the same time, what it's also doing is it's biasing your work to be seen in a different light. So therefore, other researchers can look at your work, then use that as being absolutely correct, and then spend months of work and potentially their PhD thesis on trying to duplicate and advance your work, which in fact is false. So that is not good for other people out there. Talk about false. You also have things like people fabricating research. You got various areas. You got the fabrication, whereby you're just making things up. You've got falsification, whereby you're changing things around, and plagiarism, where you're just taking someone else's ideas. All things not good. So, as the author, you're responsible for everything found in your work. If things are fraudulent data in there, you get the blame. It could be your co-author, even if you're the lead author, and some other authors put the stuff in there, but what happens is you still get the blame. And so if you have some company you've outsourced some research to, and they give you the answers back and they're perfect for what you needed, did the research actually happen? There have been cases where research companies didn't do the work, they just made it all up, and then gave the results to the scientist, who was delighted with how good the results were, and then the invoice was paid. And in fact, then later on, it was found that the work never happened. It was just fabricated. And the poor author team, the ones who actually took the hit. You've got something called conflict of interest. It's very broad. And it could be something as simple as, say, owning shares in the company whose product you are testing. If you don't mention it, then it is if anyone finds out down the road that you had shares in the company, they would perhaps expect that your paper's been biased. So therefore, you've got to state it very clearly in the COI statement at the end of your article, your manuscript. It could be other things like perhaps you have very, very strong views on a particular way of life, say macrobiotics or whatever, and then so therefore you have a different take on things on other sorts of nutritional research. So again, the COI statements are very important, and some of the authors may have a very simple COI statement, and some may have a complex one. And so it doesn't mean to say that all co-authors are covered by one simple COI statement. You might have to do individual ones per author. So looking back at ethics and research misconduct and so on, this is an interesting wiki definition. Because it can go very broadly, and unfortunately, the other people get hit down the road by using that research data, which isn't research data at all, but fake data. Also, when you're making manuscripts, do not sort of sweeten it up, make it look nicer than it really is. Because if you exaggerate your work to make it look like you're a better person, then what happens is all the people who are then using your work and citing it will be fooled into thinking it's real research as opposed to part of it being made up. So that taints all future research projects in this area, unfortunately. And then also, apart from this exaggeration, there have been certain cases where things could not be replicated, particularly in the area of cancer research around 10, 12 years ago. Tremendous number of articles could not be replicated. Whether it's because it was just bad reporting, whether it was fake, whether it was bad cell lines which weren't properly analyzed properly, I don't know. But what meant was that there was such a backlash that the public and the funding bodies started to become very suspicious about funding any cancer research because of the lack of reproducibility of that work. So that means that something else you've got to be very aware of is the methodology which you're communicating has to be very clear and can be replicated. So if you are doing a complex method, make sure that you write down exactly how to do that particular method in a way that anyone can reproduce it and get the same results as you. If the journal is uncooperative and says you've only got so many words to do this, you do a cut down version for that particular area of the methods in the paper, and then you produce a supplement, an appendix, which is the detailed methodology, so that everyone can then see exactly what's going on. Because you want to make sure that if someone reads your paper and it's done properly, that they can reproduce it and get the same answers as you. If they can't, you haven't explained it properly. And so be aware that if they cannot duplicate your work, they will think your work is suspect, and we'll mention that. Now, as I said, the funding bodies and the public also were involved with all the various aspects of ethics and similar things. You think about it, science is producing all sorts of interesting things which society wants, demands, and technology helps that work. And so if things get broken, if you get fake papers in there and so on, and then what happens is society then feels, why are we paying all our taxes for this? Why are we doing this? Why is that? And then you then start to get this backlash so that scientists are not seen as independent and honest as perhaps they should be. And that's something that we saw certainly 5-7 years ago. And we all have to work hard to make sure we do have this level of authority and respect from the public at large. So we have to take responsibility for everything to make sure everything's absolutely right. And otherwise, then we're not going to get the respect we need. Unfortunately, you also have sometimes problems with companies and politicians sometimes just diverting the information with, oh, it's just an opinion, a scientific opinion, as opposed to it's a scientific fact discovered and proved. And that is, say, sadly what's happening a bit at the moment in various parts of the world where you have information being hijacked for other purposes. How it's going to end, I'm not sure, but we have to be aware that it is actually happening, this diversion of the truth to something else. So ethical scientists, ethical researchers, we need to literally stand up and be as ethical as we can be, communicate with society in general, what we're doing, anything that's in the professional comments are there. Personal views are different. They can say, it's my personal thoughts, these are my professional thoughts. And that's very important to have that process. Because as authors, we've got lots of rights, lots of privileges, but also we've got a responsibility to be ethical. And that, I think, is not going to go away. It's probably going to get more intense in the coming years and decades. Looking at publication ethics, publishing houses have had to do a tremendous amount in the last 15, 20 years because there's been so much more increase in research fraud and, in effect, publication fraud. So if article retractions are going up, as I talked a bit about in my previous talk, and some of the ethics cases are so complex that we've actually had to hire in specialist AI experts, forensic people, figure analysis, and everything, not just at each publishing house, but all overall, to help understand what these fraud cases are, and so we can actually make sure we deal with them. And also, there's been cases with groups of people who are trying to get their own articles cited such that they increase their number of citations, so it helps their H-index by wheeling and dealing and, in effect, cooperative co-citation. I'll cite you, you cite me type thing, which is also, it's very complicated to find out. We do now have systems in place that do look and find this manipulation of citations. So yeah, we've had to up our game by spending a fortune in this sort of detection process because the fraudulent people are getting more fraudulent and getting more clever at it. They've got, for years, there's been COPE, as I mentioned earlier, Committee on Publication Ethics, and that is funded by all the publishing houses. All the publishing houses all pay a certain amount of money to this central group, and then they do all the various things around it. And they also, they work with putting things like flowcharts together, and also special policies to investigate or highlight fake special issues or suspect special issues or paper mill productions, other similar things, or multiple co-authors that shouldn't be there, and so on. The STM Integrity Hub is a bit different. That's quite new. STM is the name for the publishing houses, scientific, technical, medical. And then there's a central group of people, and there's some staff there. It's funded quite highly with the various publishing houses, and it's there for developing things. So we actually developed some, say, special closed AI for looking at suspect papers and so on. And then all the publishing houses can then use that information. Now, there's typically, to sum up, lots of ethical pitfalls of people who think they're well intentioned, but things go wrong. And there's a bunch of them, and I'll go through them one at a time. So, as I said a minute ago, the idea of conflict of interest or competing interest, you've actually got to explain that quite clearly to people. So they've actually got to be aware what's going on. If you're not sure, be transparent. So just say to the editor in your conflict of interest statement or the covering letter, here's what we've done. We do not see it as a conflict of interest, but we are now explaining it to you just for the sake of transparency. If in doubt, declare it, basically. So some journals also have things called a disclosure statement, as opposed to a conflict of interest statement. And it varies also. Sometimes it's even as detailed as, has any company funded you to go somewhere and talk at a conference? And therefore name the company and the conference, and typically got to go back 5 years, a 5-year period. Very, 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 very detailed, particularly in the area of health sciences. So it really is getting more and more detailed. Also, of course, you've got to have the same clarity for COI for reviewers and for editors. A reviewer, you can be biased, and so therefore, if you think perhaps that the editor doesn't know that you have shares in a certain company, and this particular paper you're commenting on is reviewing a product from that company, you should mention the fact that here are the various things wrong with the paper, everything's right with the paper, and as a COI, I do have shares in this company, which is fair enough. It's just transparency. The same with editors. If they also have COIs, they've got to also declare it either publicly or privately to the publishing house. So next one on is authorship disputes. The co-authors are those who are involved with writing a paper. They are not just added in, parachuted in. They are not people who helped you write the revised version, particularly. They're not people who ghost writ or anything, because what's happening is what you've got is there's certain demands for how you are an author, how you're not an author, and there's various workshops and lectures you can find this out on. But if there are problems with authorship, editors are not acting as judges or jury or executioners. It actually has to be at the author level. So typically, if there's a problem between certain co-authors, they can't agree certain things, so a dispute, then there's normally someone at the various institutes involved, whichever those particular authors are at, and that is some ethics person, and then they research ethics, and then that person's involved to see who can be the co-author or not. And sometimes they'll also be looking at these people will be looking at the internal lab notes and everything to make sure. And then if there is a file declaration, then the editors require some written and signed statement from all the authors and why things have changed. If there is a dispute of authorship, your paper gets frozen until it's resolved. Frozen for how long? Who knows? A month, 2 months, 3 years, 10 years? It's not that long. It depends. If you authors cannot agree amongst yourself what's going on, there's no mechanism in the publishing world to move things along. So it's up to you, the co-authors, to get involved and sort things out. Sometimes there's a case whereby one person thinks they should be a co-author, but in fact they're only acknowledged individual because they weren't involved with any other major research work being reported. That again has to be resolved by the authors and by the institute of the authors before the paper can move forward in the peer review process. There are cases, of course, where you have gift authors, things that just popped in, whereby people are paid money, and they pay money to get access. This is an example, again, found on the dark web, where you can find it too. So if someone asks you, hey, do you want to be in a paper? Do you want to be an author, co-author? And it's going to be an interesting article. It's going to be in scope of web of science, high impact factor. Here are the keywords. Do you want to pay? Yes, yes, yes. And if you do, and you're suddenly parachuted in as a co-author, all it's cost you is money, but the chance of it being found out is very high, and the chance of you being banned from publishing in that journal for the next 2, 3, 4 years is very high too, because editors have that ability. They can ban a specific author from submitting to a journal for a certain period of time. It's not a lifetime ban, it's not allowed, but they can ban you for a certain period of time if you basically try to cheat. So if there are author changes, and if you're a lead author and some other author says, hey, we need to add this person, why? You've got to ask why. It might be something simple like, yeah, well, he did actually do the extra experiment that the reviewers asked for. Oh, yeah, right, that makes sense, yes. Then you've actually got to make these various changes yourself and then make sure it's also approved by the editor. And typically, the additions are for things like extra experiments that needed to be done. It's not right to add someone as an author just because they have happened to polish up your revision. That's not true. That's acknowledged individual. If anyone's taken away, then also the editor is very, very alarmed, wants to know why. Is it because that person shouldn't have been there in the first place, or they were going to be there and they didn't do any work, or was it because they were going to pay money and then they don't? So whatever is the case, if you try and take away an author, the editors will be extremely nervous and interested in what goes on. Something else that's raised up recently, of course, is the use of AI in all parts of society. As a researcher, as an author, as an individual person browsing through catalogs, whatever. AI has just really leaped into our world, and we've got to be very careful how we actually do use AI. We're talking about generative AI in general. So can ChatGPT be as an author? Well, here you see left-hand one ChatGPT, second one is a couple of other systems. How can a generative AI system be called an author? It can't. It's just a tool. And a tool gives you information, and you, as a human being, have to look at what information given to you by that AI tool and see, is it of use, and is it not some sort of a total fabrication by the AI system? Because we all know that can happen now and again, that somehow AI makes things up. And so that's also very important. Now, should you use generative AI? Yeah, well, you can use it if you want to improve readability and language of the work. Okay. If your English second language not too good at writing it. But you've got to have absolute human oversight. You can't just assume whatever it generates is correct, because it can be totally false. It can be easily biased. Also, if you are using it for some reason, you've got to disclose it in the manuscript and how you've used it. Like you might say it was used as part of the language improving of this manuscript or whatever. It's not author or co-author, of course. If you're using generative AI in the research process, it's entirely different. You can then use all you do, and then in the methods section of your paper, you list very clearly how you've used AI, what it's done, and what it hasn't done, and very clearly state the information that it has just generated, because there are cases where this is extremely useful. At the same time, it's of great value, but you've also got to be very, very clear, transparently in referring to these things. For example, there have been cases of using AI, trained AI, to look at X-rays to find patterns and processes in human X-rays, which radiologists would have no idea what he's doing, and AI can do that very quickly. And there's been some very interesting developments and work in that area. So how about images? Now that's a difficulty. AI just makes things up. So publishing houses do not allow the use of AI to create or alter images because it can just make changes for no reason whatsoever. You don't know what they've done. If of course it's part of the research experiment, that's different, research design. But if you're just taking an image and just making it look better, that's not helpful at all because all you're doing is you're confusing things. So, for example, bottom right here, deep fake Western blots, totally spurious, just banged out by some generative AI system in a couple of minutes. And it means it's totally meaningless, but it's worse, it's false. And so therefore you are trying to deceive readers, is not the idea. And here, other image manipulation, the adjustments of the brightness, contrast, color. They're acceptable if you're very clear and explain what you've done. Sneakily doing things is not good. You know? So as you can see in that middle one, for example, you've got certain things are moving around because just taking away bits in here. So this is just totally faking it. And that is straight image manipulation. And so now we have all sorts of interesting things that publishing houses have special software that looks at these, identify suspect image irregularities, which is useful. Sad that we need to do this. It's been going on for a while. Back in 2004, nice example now, that long ago. So figure manipulation is allowed for some things as long as you declare it in the figure legend. So you can change things, brightness, contrast, color balance, but you mustn't take things away or add things. But say simple, be sensible. You know, this is an example of something that went badly wrong. 2001, interesting article, interesting figure, a good paper. It's immunostaining. Some idiots, well, some non-scientists, some people took this figure, boosted it in Photoshop, added a few spots here and there, flipped it round, and published it on an entirely different topic in another journal in 2004. It took a while to find out because we didn't have the software then, but when it was found out, now you cannot find that picture online because now it has a big banner across it saying retracted as fraudulent image. So those people, I'm not calling them scientists, those people linked to that 2004 paper, their name is linked forever with a fraudulent paper. Yeah, it happens. It's good that these things get found out. But also, you have other sort of things, data falsification gets found out too. And again, things like PubPeer often will flag things which they think are very strange things going on. And then other people, scientists, look at it and comment on it. And it doesn't take too long for there's a consensus of opinion as what is good and what's not good. On the left, it's just a T error bar. Now, if you know how it works with doing graphs, this is your margin of error out there. If you look very carefully, some person has actually carefully pasted in a capital T from a font in that figure to make it the error bar. Isn't that outrageous? Anyway, it was found. Retraction watch link there shows you what it was. So yeah, so there's all these things that are out there, and there's the ways to catch them are getting better and better and better. As I said, there's no statute of limitation. It can be any time you want to. You can be found out, and then you can find yourself fighting a paper that has to be taken away. Plagiarism. If it's someone else's work, it's plagiarism. If it's your own work, it's typically self-plagiarism or textual overlap. So straight outright plagiarism is whereby you just take the whole thing, whole block, No, Control C, Control V, that's it. Without any citations. That's straight theft. Plagiarism is actually from the Latin, which means no, to steal. So it's pretty correct phrasing here. Text recycling is when you use your own works, but you don't cite your previous work. So the readers don't know you published previously. And so they think they're actually getting original work that you are presenting to them, when in fact it's published already by you. So you've got to make sure that any text recycling is clearly explained and cited, so the reader knows that it's previous work by you and you're just mentioning it in this manuscript for clarity and completeness. And again, paraphrasing, rephrasing text in your own words. Make sure you cite everyone. I mentioned it in the previous talk, but if you are using some text from someone else, it's a great paper, it's going to be one of your references, and it's a reference list. If you've got some interesting text, make sure you put speech marks around it in the draft so you know it's not your text, it's someone else's. You either can leave the speech marks in, or you can rewrite it a bit but keep the citation in, so you're rewriting it to your style, but still the data in there, the information in there is there because you're citing it, because otherwise you're just stealing someone's intellectual property. And you have interesting things too, that you have, if it is your work and then you're then repeating it, to make sure why you're repeating it, why the overlap is there. Supposing, for example, you wrote an article and it's on a particular event or something you found, and then you want to just focus a bit different angle, say perhaps on policymakers as opposed to researchers. You can again use the same data, but then you rewrite the description, the conclusion, the interpretation, but then you state somewhere as previously published, which was mentioned, reference, and then you go on to explain why you are coming back to this data, but a different angle on it, because you're trying to tease out another aspect which might help other sorts of readers. You make sure that your other paper is reference 1 in all the various references you have in that new work. I was talking about this checking of information, authenticate crossref. We mentioned it briefly earlier in the other talk, but in effect, the journal editor gets to see the overlap score, and then by clicking on it, they then get to see what the texts are highlighted and which journals they're linked to highlighted. Then they can decide. Also, they can filter things out to decide whether they want to have the references included or the methods included, and so on. So that's useful, because otherwise you're not giving readers new material, you're just recycling things, and it's cheating. So if you've got multiple language, multiple submissions, what comes first? Yeah, that's a difficulty, because sometimes you might send 3 or 4 articles, so 3 or 4 copies of the same article, to different journals, and one is faster than the other, and that gets accepted first. Does that mean it's actually won the race, and the other articles then get withdrawn, retracted by the authors? No, in effect, when you submit your manuscript to a journal, one of the things you've got, the click boxes you click, is you confirm that this manuscript is not anywhere else, it's not being submitted anywhere else for possible publication. So if you click that box and you have sent it somewhere else, you've actually lied. You've lied to the journal. And if they find out that you sent 3 or 4 or 5 different copies to different journals, and then they find that out, they will be most upset. And the normal agreement nowadays with COPE is that all copies of the manuscript are removed, including the one that was first to publish. So even though it was technically not duplicate, the concept was flawed because the authors were unethical and lying. So therefore, that one should be penalized as well and taken down. That is a new change. It didn't used to be until about 10 years ago. So yeah, do you do it? No, you don't do it. Preprint servers I talked about in the last talk, but basically a preprint server is not a publication, it is posting. So therefore you can easily post something and then submit it to a journal. Once, if you have published something on a preprint server, sorry, if you have posted something on a preprint server, and then you get accepted somewhere, the idea is you go back to that preprint server, and then you add text saying this text is now accepted as a manuscript, and you give the DOI link to the journal. In other words, people reading the preprint server know that your particular posting has gone through peer review, has been accepted, and so therefore there it is off somewhere else. So that's the idea. Now here's something different, like sadness, I'm afraid. Editor-in-chief trying to cheat. So here's a question: how many red flags can you see in this revision decisions? In other words, the editor-in-chief says, "Hey, author, read this. It's get in there. Add these references, and then it'll probably be okay." So what do you do? As an author, do you think, well, the editor-in-chief knows best? Well, I'm not so sure. So firstly, there's the ones they say, cite these references, 5 of them. Okay, all right. And then you say, and that's conditional of being accepted. And then it's that journal, which in other words, this editor-in-chief is trying to get 3 more citations to add it to his citation stack, which is not really the idea, I'm afraid. It has happened a lot in some topic areas and has been flagged and is now being actively checked. Are you required to add to these references? No, you're not. You can look at it and look at them up and see, is it of value? If it looks like it's very much citation stacking, then you should do some of them and then also send this through to the publisher of this journal, because the publisher will then have some serious words with the editor-in-chief, which might well mean that they're tossed out, because this is so totally unethical. The publisher does not interfere with the peer review process until things are shown to be wrong. And this is an example of it being shown to be wrong. So yeah, be careful. If they ask you to do various things, look at the examples very clearly. It makes sense, then add them. If it doesn't make sense, if alarm bells are ringing, check with the co-authors, decide what to do. If in doubt, be transparent, contact the publisher. And so you have other sorts of things. You've got, this is what I was saying, it's conditional coercive citations. And some reviewers do this too. They want their own paper to be cited to increase their citation numbers to help their H-index. And sometimes editors don't notice. So you really got to make sure that what is being suggested to you, it might improve your paper tremendously because there's a few things you didn't notice, and now it makes sense. You do it. If it looks like a bit dodgy, then you don't do it. So yeah, you as authors have got to be extremely cautious. And sometimes you find things like citation stuffing. It's the citations added literally at revision stage, because you weren't asked to add them by the peer review process, but suddenly you add a whole bunch of them. Why? Is it possible that the referees won't check those references and you suddenly got a whole bunch more citations for those people you are then listing? Maybe, but nowadays these are checked a lot more. So if in doubt, don't do it. You also have things like predatory journals, which is sort of sad reality. And a predatory journal is a journal which defrauds the researchers who are trying to be authors. As I said, sometimes in the past they can be fake journals, but they also can be journals which look like they're okay, and they are okay, but at the same time they're not okay. In other words, they've been processed, they've got themselves a website, they're not yet in Scopus because they haven't been published long enough, they would argue. But often these predatory journals, they want you to pay them money. The peer review process is as long as it takes them to type out the invoice. And then typically you'll be paying by some dubious payment process, sometimes even in Bitcoin. And then the idea is that you then get yourself published. It could be published. It could be that there's this fake journal up there, it gets published. And when it gets found out, the plug gets pulled on that fake journal, and that paper just disappears, so all the other papers too. So in effect, if it seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. It doesn't normally apply to subscription journals, because subscription journals are subscribed to by librarians who know what they're doing. It's typically open access journals with desperate authors who think that they've been asked if they want to submit an article. And sometimes also it's some clever things. They'll say, well, it's you publicly submit to us and we'll decide if it qualifies for waiving of author fees or not. And so you didn't do that, and then it comes back and says, well, we looked at it, sorry, we've already had enough of these waived articles for this journal this month, so therefore you've got to pay X. You're already in a dialogue now with these people, and so you find that things can go badly wrong. Paper mills, talked about very briefly earlier on, but paper mills are typically it's run by companies using scientists, mid-range scientists, who are trying to earn an extra buck illegally by making articles. Those articles are then sent into journals, and it's so sophisticated that what can happen is that they'll say, well, you pay this money and we'll make sure it gets into a journal with impact factor above X, and we'll know you'll get at least 15 citations, because in effect, other papers they're going to write will have this article in it too. That's where you get your citations. It's vicious. And so it charges authors depending on what they're doing, and it might be that the authors just thought that they're buying some research work to be done, save them doing it, and then they can then write it up and then publish it. But in effect, that research work never happened. It just was just totally fictitious. And sometimes they'll say, you don't get access to the article until you paid us. And so what they do is they have a burner email address, and you don't have access to this. Once you pay them, then you have access to this. And then, so again, publishing houses look at these one-off emails, which look a bit strange, and they know that there's something odd going on. And if you're using something like a Hotmail account and you publish more than one article from that, it's probably okay. If it's some strange, weird email address, Hotmail account, and it never occurs again, then again, alarm bells ring. So they have done all sorts of things. They've got individual papers. They got special issues whereby they have the guest editor just basically sells access to the journal. There's conference proceedings. So there's all sorts of clever ways that they've actually managed to offer their services to scientists who are too busy or not skilled enough to write good papers. And so we normally assume that the papers never happened. Research never happened. It's just made up. And the papers describe it, but there's, yeah, real research, but with solid authorship. Yeah, well, fake research, fake guest editors, fake reviewers. Sometimes it's real people's names, but different institute. Or it's a real person's name and institute, but it's a fake email address. All these things that have been done. It's quite difficult for us as publishing houses to constantly stay on the ball with all this. And we now have closed AI systems to identify paper mill schemes. And typically it's the mass rejections, retractions. You have people's names blacked. People are then known in the industry as being involved with paper mills, and so they no longer are allowed to submit to certain journals. They can't go on boards and things. So in effect, it's a sad reality. It's actually there's a market, so people are exploiting the market to make money on desperate researchers who need to have articles published. It was happening a lot in China, where people who have medical degrees have to publish once every 2 years on some research topic, or else they would no longer have it was called a sort of a certain level of authorization, and so they would go down in their income, and so they were in effect paying for research labs to do the research for them, and then they would write it up. But these research labs then quickly devolved into just fabrication sites that just made papers up, sadly. So in terms of seriousness, pale to strong red, questions of concern, erratum, corrigendum, retraction, removal, and then withdrawal. So it's also, of course, remember that whatever happens out there, in the record of science, your name is linked to that continuously. And any time that your name is linked to a particular retraction, it doesn't go away. So if you do apply for funding for some research project, whoever the funding body is, they might look you up and find you've got 2 or 3 retracted articles for some other dubious reasons. Your chance of getting funding is, well, we say it diminishes. The nice way of saying it. So in terms of research integrity, there's a whole bunch of information which is out there. There's the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors authorship. There's the declaration tools, the conflict of interest, and so on. The AI policy. So there's lots of information you can find. And again, as I said in the previous talk, you can get all these various interesting things on Researcher Academy, because Researcher Academy is all free, a bunch of tools, checklists, things you can download, things you can view, and so on. And of course, your university library has got lots of information too, all these various great recordings of other speakers doing things. So make sure that you're using whatever's available to you. If graduate schools help you with writing courses, use it. If you know that there's some university people in the faculty are journal editors or board members, ask them for help and advice. Don't stalk them, but ask them for help and advice. And the open access policies are changing so rapidly. The best people to know what's going on is your library, because It's their job to know. So as far as I'm concerned, this is basically my slide deck for this topic area. Here is my email address. As I said, I'm now Emeritus in that after working for 36 years with Elsevier, I've been retired now for 1 year. And we have, that's my email address, and it's Wales' email address. Any questions you got later, please contact us, because we'll be very happy to talk to you. It's our job to help you get better at being authors. So at that point, I'll stop see if any questions there are. And it's now about 5 minutes or so of question time.
Yes, we have almost about 3 minutes or 4 minutes for questions. Then we need then after that to have the other session. So any questions?
Yes, I have a question, Dr.
Yes.
Majid.
Yes, go ahead, please.
One question. Do we have any sort of institution that can take action against an editor? If an editor, the entire session is almost all about authors, but I think there's also an ethical issue with editors, because some of them, for some strange reasons, what they do is not quite normal. Is there an institution that can take an editor on? Because it looks like
Yes.
almost not.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's, firstly, the publishing house is desperate to maintain its good name. And so therefore they always look at all complaints about editors if they're justified. And if the publishing house doesn't do anything, the Committee on Publication Ethics, COPE, also looked into these things about editors being unethical. Yes, for sure.
All right, thank you.
Any other question?
Who polices the police, basically?
Okay. Any other question?
Yes, sir. I have a question, if you allow me, please.
Yes, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Actually, I want to ask that sometime we have work submitted by students to us. So what we can do best is either to check it from Authenticate or use Turnitin. So even though after checking this, if something bad happens, like you have mentioned in your slides, so what best we can do in that scenario? Thank you.
If you have access to Turnitin, that has a lot of information in there. Authenticates is a broader, but at the same time, see it as an educational process to explain to the author what they've done wrong, the student what they've done wrong, and how they should write it differently, how they should be citing it differently, how they should do it. It is part of being a researcher, is learning how to do things properly, and part of being someone in charge of researchers or students is to guiding them into the right way of being a good author. And so therefore, if however it has been through this whole process and it then later is and you didn't spot that it was very high overlap, and then it comes back, it's a question of oops, looking at what's going on, and then learn from the students' mistakes and your mistakes for next time round. Does that help?
Thank you. Yes,
Yes,
it is. So
thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Anthony, for this nice presentation. Thank you also for the participants for joining this session, and see you inshallah in those who will be who register for the next session. See you in the next session inshallah, in the remaining events of the data activities. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you.